Welcome back to the deep dive. We're trying something a little different today.
Yeah, a bit of a high wire act for us this time.
Exactly. Usually we take one topic and drill straight down, but today we're attempting to connect three dots that, well, at first glance, they don't seem like they belong in the same universe, let alone the same conversation.
It really does feel like we're assembling a puzzle with pieces from three entirely different boxes today.
It does, yeah. So box number one is high-level, almost abstract theology. It's a very detailed analysis of ISIS ideology for the Brookings Institution.
Right.
Then box number two is a dense, gritty academic study on Spain's prison policies regarding terrorism. And box number three, and this is actually my personal favorite, is a localized, very frustrated newsletter from a Spanish prison workers union.
It's an eclectic mix, for sure. You've got the abstract theory, the government policy, and then the sweaty, stressful reality right down on the ground.
Right. And the mission today for us and for you listening is to see what happens when those distinct layers crash into each other. Yeah. Specifically, what happens when a high-minded government strategy meets a religiously motivated ideology inside a jail cell that is understaffed and overheating.
And the hook here is Spain. Spain is fascinating because they actually have a major win on their scorecard.
Yeah.
They defeated a domestic terror group, ETA, and they used their prison system to do it.
That's the central tension we're looking at. The sources are essentially asking, can you take that exact same playbook, the one that broke a Basque separatist group, and use it against a global apocalyptic ideology like ISIS?
Or does the very nature of this new ideology turn the prison system from a containment unit into an incubator?
Right. So let's officially introduce the stack so you know what we're working with. First, we have a Brookings analysis titled From Paper State to Caliphate. Second, we have a paper called Prison Policy as an Anti-Terrorist Tool by Manuel R. Torres Soriano. And finally, EnfoKey, which is the newsletter from ACAIO, the Spanish Prison Union.
Let's start with the why. We really have to get inside the head of the ideology before we can understand why the prisons might be failing to contain it.
Okay, let's unpack that Brookings paper. It focuses on the rise of ISIS, but specifically their brand of belief. Because I think a lot of people, they just hear ISIS and think violent extremists.
Yeah.
But the paper argues it's much more specific than that. It uses the term jihadi Salafism. Can we break that down?
Sure. It's basically a fusion of two things. Salafism is a movement within Sunni Islam that advocates for a return to the practices of the pious ancestors, the earliest Muslims.
Right.
It's ultra-conservative, very scriptural. But here's the thing. Most Salafists aren't violent at all. They are quietists. They stay out of politics completely.
So they just want to live like the ancestors and be left alone.
Exactly. But then you add the jihadi part. This is the belief that military struggle is a divinely ordained method to bring about that return. When you combine them, you get jihadi Salafism. But, and this is the key insight from the Brookings paper, even within that violent group, there is a massive political spectrum.
Yeah, this part actually blew my mind. The paper describes a spectrum where Al-Qaeda is the left wing and ISIS is the right wing.
It sounds totally absurd to Western ears, doesn't it?
It really does. And just to be clear for you listening, we're not endorsing these labels or taking any political stance here. We're just impartially reporting the terminology these researchers use to differentiate the groups.
Right. It's just their internal framing. So we tend to think of them all as just terrorists. But that internal distinction creates massive conflict. Al-Qaeda, under leaders like Zawahiri, was the left. They were populists. They were pragmatic. They believed in winning hearts and minds first.
So they were willing to play the long game.
Yes. Al-Qaeda was basically saying, we'll establish the caliphate later when the time is right. They wanted consensus. They were actually willing to compromise on who they killed or when, specifically to avoid alienating the broader Muslim population.
But ISIS?
ISIS is the far right of this movement. They represent absolute immediacy and elitism. They said, we are not waiting. We do it now.
And the Brookings paper highlights a few key differentiators that drive that impatience, right? One of them is offensive jihad.
Right. Al-Qaeda often framed their violence as defensive. The West is attacking us, so we fight back. It's a reactive stance. But ISIS believes in offensive campaigns. They believe it is their divine duty to uproot idolatry or shirk wherever it exists, regardless of whether they are being attacked or not.
And their definition of shirk creates a very wide target list.
A massive one. For ISIS, shirk isn't just worshiping statues, it's democracy, it's secular law, and crucially, it's Shia Islam. Which brings us to Zarqawi, the father of the movement in Iraq. He introduced a virulent anti-Shiism to the group. He viewed them as apostates who absolutely had to be killed.
The paper even mentions that al-Qaeda leadership actually told him to tone it down.
They did. Zawahiri wrote to him effectively saying, "Stop beheading people and attacking Shia mosques. You're making us look bad."
Wow.
But Zarqawi refused. He demanded exclusive association. If you aren't 100% with ISIS, you are against them.
There's another psychological element in the Brookings paper that I think is crucial for our prison discussion later. The concept of the paper state.
Yes, this is basically the massive chip on their shoulder. Back in the mid-2000s, the early iteration of the group called itself the Islamic State of Iraq, but they didn't really control anything. Critics, even other jihadists, mocked them.
Right, they called them a paper state.
Exactly, implying they only existed on the internet or in press releases.
So they essentially developed an inferiority complex.
A deep one. That mockery fueled an absolute obsession with proving they were real. They needed physical territory. They needed to implement their law right now. They couldn't just be a shadowy network like al-Qaeda. They had to be a governing body. That theological need to validate their existence drove their expansion.
Okay, so we have a group that is deeply impatient, obsessed with holding territory to prove they aren't a joke, and believes in purifying the world of anyone who disagrees with their extremely specific interpretation.
Right.
Now, let's pivot to the how. Let's look at the laboratory, Spain.
Spain is the perfect case study here because they have been dealing with terrorism for decades. The paper by Manuel Torres Soriano details the government's long fight against ETA.
Just to set the scene for you, ETA was a Basque separatist group. They were fighting for independence, and they killed over 800 people over several decades.
Yeah.
But the Spanish government eventually broke them. How did they do it?
They turned the prison system itself into a strategic weapon. They used two main tools, dispersal and reinsertion.
Let's break those down. Dispersal sounds like exactly what it is, just scattering them.
Yes. Historically, ETA prisoners wanted to be kept together. They wanted to turn their prison wing into a little Basque country. They actually maintained their rigid military hierarchy inside the walls. If you were a foot soldier on the outside, you still took orders from your commander in the cell next door.
So the government scattered them to prisons all over Spain.
Divide and conquer. When you isolated a member, you cut them off from their commanding officer. They were proud political prisoners, but without the group reinforcement, their morale just crumbled.
And then came reinsertion.
The carrot to the stick. If an ETA prisoner renounced violence and broke ties with the group, the government would reward them. They'd move them closer to home, give them prison benefits, because ETA members were fighting for a political goal, independence they could be negotiated with.
Yeah.
Ultimately, they just wanted to go home.
So Spain looks at this success and says, great, we have a blueprint for terrorism. We know how to do this.
Yeah.
Then the jihadists show up. And according to the Soriano paper, the government tries to apply the exact same logic. Does it work?
The short answer is no. In fact, the paper argues it might be backfiring spectacularly.
What makes them so different from ETA in a prison environment?
It comes down to structure and psychology. The paper calls it the jihadist dilemma. First, there is no rigid hierarchy to break. Jihadi Salafism is a fluid, horizontal network. You can't decapitate the leadership in the same way because the ideology itself acts as the leader.
And they don't even admit they're terrorists.
Yeah, exactly. ETA members were proud. They claim their status loudly. Jihadist prisoners, according to the study, often deny any involvement. They practice taqiyya, religious deception, or just lie to avoid longer sentences or deportation.
Which makes sense.
Right. But you can't reinsert someone who claims they didn't do anything wrong. You can't break a group that claims it doesn't exist.
But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly pretty scary. The contagion effect.
This is the critical insight of the Soriano paper. With ETA, if you disperse them into the general prison population, they isolated themselves. They felt superior to common criminals like drug dealers or thieves. They simply didn't want to mix with them.
But ISIS.
ISIS ideology commands them to proselytize. It is fundamentally a missionary faith. If you take a committed jihadist and drop him into a general population prison ward in Madrid or Valencia, you haven't isolated him. You've just given him a captive audience.
And the numbers in the paper are significant. At the time of the report, about 14% of the Spanish prison population was Muslim. Many of them were just common prisoners.
And those common prisoners are incredibly vulnerable. They are often marginalized, angry, perhaps dealing with guilt or looking for a sense of belonging or protection. The jihadist offers them a path to purity and dignity without asking them to stop being aggressive. He just redirects the aggression toward the state.
So the government is completely stuck in a paradox.
The paradox of concentration versus dispersal. If you concentrate all the jihadists in one prison, you risk creating a war room, a command center where they can plot and reinforce each other's beliefs.
Yeah.
But if you disperse them, you create missionary outposts in every single prison in the country.
It feels like a totally lose-lose situation.
It is a severe dilemma. You are either building an army base for them or you are sending their best recruiters out to fresh fields.
Okay, so we have the theology that demands expansion, and we have the government policy that accidentally facilitates it. Now I want to go to the third layer, the where, the reality on the ground. We are looking at the newsletter ENFOQEE from AGEUP, the Prison Workers Union.
This is where the rubber meets the road. While the generals and politicians are debating dispersal in air-conditioned offices, the actual prison guards are dealing with a system in total crisis.
Yeah, this newsletter is not a polished academic document. It is angry, it is raw, it feels like reading someone's diary after a terrible day at work.
It really does. It paints a picture of a system that is bursting at the seams. They use the word hacinamiento, overcrowding, specifically referring to prisons in Castilla y León. They talk about having over 2,500 vacancies in the workforce.
So you have way too many prisoners and nowhere near enough guards to watch them.
And the guards who are there are furious. The newsletter discusses a draft protocol for safety against aggression. The union calls it ambiguous, full of loopholes or lagunas. They basically feel the administration doesn't care if they get hurt on the job.
There was this one article in the newsletter that I found bizarrely fascinating. It was an opinion piece about El Tonto the Fool in the workplace.
Yes, the Tonto article. It was so specific and strangely personal. It categorized colleagues into saviors, useful fools, and damaging fools. It just reads like a massive vent session. It describes intense internal friction, guards who think they're saviors but actually make things worse, and just a general lack of cohesion among the staff.
And if you're listening, you might be wondering, why does that matter for counterterrorism?
Because security relies entirely on morale and teamwork. If the guards are fighting each other, writing angry op-eds about damaging fools, and feeling unsupported by the administration, they are definitely not paying full attention to the subtle dynamics of radicalization happening out in the yard.
They are completely distracted.
Completely. And then there is the detail that absolutely floored me. It's from the Soriano paper, but it connects directly to this lack of resources on the ground, the language barrier.
This is the number that I think you need to really hear.
It is a devastating statistic. In 2008, there were approximately 6,000 Arab-speaking inmates in the Spanish prison system. Do you know how many translators the entire system had on staff?
35.
35.
That is, I mean, that math does not compute. That's one translator for every 170 inmates, assuming the translators work 24/7, which obviously they don't.
It effectively means the guards are deaf. They literally cannot understand what the prisoners are saying to one another. You have a contagion effect happening in plain sight, but because it's happening in Arabic and the guard is overworked, underpaid, and doesn't speak the language, it goes completely unnoticed.
And the Soriano paper mentions that translators aren't even allowed in the living quarters, right?
Correct. They are mostly used for official letters or formal legal communications, so the day-to-day chatter, the sermons in the corner of the yard, the recruitment pitch happening over lunch. It's a total black box to the authorities.
This brings us to the synthesis of all these sources. We call this the incubator effect.
If we look at the origin story of ISIS, we have to remember Zarqawi again. Where did he become a leader? Where did he refine his charisma and his extremist theology?
In a Jordanian prison.
Exactly. Prison was his university. He went in as a street thug and came out a terrifying leader. He learned exactly how to organize men behind bars.
And the Soriano paper explicitly warns that common prisoners are the exact recruitment pool these guys target.
So let's assemble the puzzle here. You have the paper state ideology, a belief system that demands constant expansion, absolute loyalty, and aggressive conversion. You drop that ideology into a Spanish prison system designed for ETA, a completely different type of enemy.
So you disperse the ideologues, which just spreads the virus.
You spread them into a population of common Muslim prisoners who are already feeling marginalized, and you place them under the supervision of guards who are suffering from overcrowding, low morale, and literally cannot speak the language of the people they are watching.
Yeah, it sounds like the perfect storm.
It is. The paper state of ISIS is effectively fighting against a paper wall of bureaucracy. The Union newsletter complains heavily about bureaucratic volume and the lack of real tools. The ISIS ideology thrives on that exact inefficiency. They exploit every crack in the system.
It's genuinely terrifying to think that a policy designed to stop terrorism dispersal might actually be facilitating it simply because the state refuses to update its understanding of the enemy.
And because the state isn't investing in the boring stuff, it's very easy for a politician to announce a shiny new counter-terror strategy or hold a press conference. It's really hard to hire 2,500 new guards and 500 Arabic translators, but that's where the war is actually being fought.
The newsletter mentioned a phrase, pecunia non outlet money doesn't smell. They were directly criticizing the administration's budget priorities. It really just comes down to resources.
It does. You can't fight a complex theological war on the cheap. Winning the war of ideas isn't just about debating scripture on the internet. It's about logistics. It's about how crowded the cell block is. It's about whether the guard feels safe enough to engage with the inmates or if he just stays hidden behind the glass.
So what does this all mean for us, for you listening?
I think it raises a massive fundamental question about the modern prison system itself. We generally assume prisons act as containers. You put the bad thing in the box and it stays in the box. But the sources suggest that for jihadi Salafism, the prison isn't a box at all. It's a microphone.
And the dispersal policy spreads the virus, and the concentration policy creates a war room.
Then we're left with the highly uncomfortable possibility that the prison system, as it is currently designed, is fundamentally incapable of containing this ideology. We might need an entirely new concept of detention, one that focuses heavily on theological deprogramming and massive linguistic resources, rather than just physical walls and iron bars.
That is a very heavy thought to leave on. It turns out the front line of the war on terror might not be a battlefield. It might just be a budget meeting about translators' salaries in a union hall in Spain.
The devil is always in the details, or in this case, in the staffing spreadsheets.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you look at the boring details of policy a little differently now, because that is exactly where the real battle is happening.
Until next time.
See you then.